Welcome back to Canadian Justice. I'm talking to my friend Derek Ross, the Executive Director of Christian Legal Fellowship, about what his organization did in 2022 and what they're looking forward to in the new year. So, in the last segment, Derek, we were talking about the role of interveners in the court. This is a friend of the court who comes in when the implications of a case are beyond just the two parties to the dispute. And CLF has done a number of interventions, including a really, really important one in Quebec related to the religious symbols law in that province. Can you tell us a little bit about that law, what it does, its impact on the religious and faith communities in Quebec, and the position of the CLF?
Absolutely. So viewers might be familiar with Bill 21. That's the controversial piece of legislation in Quebec, which purports to advance neutrality, state neutrality, the idea that the government should not take sides on religious questions, which is in itself not a controversial principle. That's something that the Supreme Court has said is, in fact, a constitutional principle that the state should remain neutral. But how the bill advances it is quite controversial because what it's done is it's prohibited a number of categories of workers in the public sector from wearing religious symbols at work. And what that has done is effectively excluded a large number of faith members of faith communities from working in the public sector as teachers, as lawyers who work for the government. They're forced to either disavow their openly religious identity or to abstain from participating in these public institutions as a public employee. And so we're really concerned about that because it takes the position that one's faith identity is something that is inherently problematic, that needs to be suppressed or hidden or neutralized, when in fact the richness of our commitment to diversity is really something that's enhanced by allowing people of all faith communities, including those who do not have religious identity, to all participate in the public square. That's what we believe neutrality requires, is not to be opposed to religion, but equally accommodating of all religious identities and non-religious identities. But Bill 21 does the opposite. It basically prioritizes those who are not religious or those who are willing to appear to be non-religious over those whose faith commitments compel them to wear a religious symbol as an observation of their sincere religious commitments. So the Quebec government, in invoking this bill, relied on the notwithstanding clause. That's a provision of the charter that allows a law to operate even if it limits certain core constitutional protections, such as religious freedom and equality. And so the Quebec Superior Court, who first heard this dispute, largely upheld the law on the basis that the notwithstanding clause immunized it from being struck down. However, the lower court did take issue and express concern with a number of elements of the legislation, and also struck down aspects of it which limited certain charter rights which are not subject to the notwithstanding clause, protections for minority language education rights, for example, and democratic rights. So because this was something of a mixed result, both sides appealed that decision to the Quebec Court of Appeal, where Christian Legal Fellowship intervened along with a number of other groups. And the Quebec Court of Appeal heard that appeal in November. We're expecting a decision sometime later this year.
And depending on the outcome, what do you think the chances are that this will be appealed again to the Supreme Court of Canada?
Yeah, I think either way, this is a case that is likely to make its way to the Supreme Court of Canada. I can only speculate, of course, but this is an issue that engages really national interests, right? It asks this question of, can a provincial government exclude people from participating in its public institutions solely on the basis of their openly religious identity? That's a question that impacts not just religious minorities in Quebec, but religious minorities across the country. And that's one of the reasons that Christian Legal Fellowship wanted to intervene, to argue that a true conception of state neutrality is one that accommodates everyone and doesn't prefer one group over another.
Fascinating arguments, and we're going to be watching that case closely at Canadian Justice. We've got to go to commercial break now, but when we come back, I want to talk about one of the other controversial legal topics that's really hot right now, and that is medical assistance in dying and what Christian Legal Fellowship's perspective is on that issue. We will be right back.